Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope you are all well. This video is the recording of my live presentation at the Cosmic Summit, held in Asheville earlier in 2023. I get into the premise for what I've been calling the Tale of Two Industries, and dive into the work around the recent vase scanning project. I've done several videos on these vases this year, and there's definitely more coming, as in the last couple of weeks I had the chance to inspect and handle a large number of pre-dynastic hardstone vases that are owned by a private collector. Many of these have been scanned and initial geometric analysis has been performed. I'm working on a video going over these new developments, but I can say a couple of things here. The results from several of these vases are extraordinary, with as good or in some cases even better levels of precision than our initial vase, and we're seeing equally interesting geometric and mathematic patterns in the initial analysis, although there is more work to be done here. When it comes to provenance, even though I think that anybody claiming the first vase is fake is only showing just how ignorant they are when it comes to machining and precision, several of these vases have impeccable provenance, going back to the 1800s, essentially the time that they were dug up by our civilization. Let's just say that I'm very much looking forward to producing this video. This Cosmic Summit presentation is about an hour long, and I do have a much longer and more comprehensive version of this talk, which is closer to 3 hours, one that I recorded in my studio at home. So if you're interested in that, then the link is below in the description. I've had a lot of requests for my live talk, so I wanted to share that with everyone today. The Cosmic Summit conference is moving forward bigger and better in 2024. Early bird tickets are now on sale, and it's going to be held June 15th and 16th in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm very much looking forward to the event. I'm also speaking at the shortly upcoming Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge in Palm Springs on October 20 to 22nd in 2023. If you're interested in either conference, the links to both of them are below in the description. Cheers.
The next dude that's going to be talking is one of my favorites, and one of the reasons why I got into this in the first place. It was his tour that I went on that kick-started my whole journey and my absolute passion for ancient history. Ben is our second Australian to grace the stage today. He's a writer, researcher, content creator. He got a Bachelor of Science from James Cook University, and he had a 20-year career, multinational career in IT. Very, very clever guy. He's an international explorer and a relentless truth seeker, and he's a solid guy, and he helped me with my YouTube when I first started, and I think that shows a huge your content of your character if you're able to pass on the baton. So I want to say a huge welcome to Ben Van Kerkwijk, Uncharted X!
Thank you very much.
Hell yeah!
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you. This is my cue card. Thank you guys, very kind. Very happy to be here. I was stoked when George put this together. It's actually the first chance I've had to talk to a crowd like this. I've been meeting everyone, the last day or two, and I look forward to meeting a whole lot more of you. It's been just a tremendous. I think there's a whole movement happening around this stuff now, and it's fantastic to see everybody here. And thank you for your time and attention, and thanks to George for setting all of this up. So let's see here. So yeah, what I want to get into today, and we'll try and cover as much of this as we can in the time we have, is essentially taking a look at the evidence for some ancient technology. Johanna's touched on some of it. I know Russ is going to talk a bit about it, but I want to frame this in something I'm calling a tale of two industries. Because when we look at the standard model of history, and particularly we're going to focus on Egypt, although a lot of what we'll cover can also be related to other ancient civilizations in South America, China, Japan, all over the place, Lebanon. We're going to focus on Egypt, but they do fall into a category of a couple of different, essentially industries, one that really matches the standard model of history, and then one that doesn't, and there's a lot of contradictions and things when you dig into the details of that. So a little bit about me, Ben Van Kerkwijk, and Johanna gave me a great introduction. I am Australian, although I do live in the US. I recently got my citizenship here. I've been here for like 17, 18 years. Thank you. And yes, I have spent 20 years, primarily lived in Singapore for a while, 20 years in IT, essentially network architecture. I ended up in the chief technology office for Hewlett-Packard, working in data center and cloud and virtualization. I've always been interested in this topic. My mother was a history teacher. And essentially, I met Graham Hancock for the first time in 2013, had the chance to travel with him for a couple of weeks through Peru and Bolivia. That was revelatory. And then I also went with him in 2015, which was my first chance to visit Egypt, and that was another 2-week tour through Egypt. Actually, on that trip, not part of the tour, but I did happen, that's where I met Yusuf Ayoun. Some of you who've seen my work will know who he is. He's turned into a really good friend and teacher of mine. And that was kind of the tipping point. Like at that point, I was like, okay, there's definitely something else going on here. And since 2016, I have pretty much been pursuing this full time. Channels Uncharted X, publishing on YouTube, on the website. I'm actually also, all my videos are now on Spotify and Rumble if you guys want to use those platforms. So where I like to start with this is really a look at what the orthodox story of history is. So what's the standard model? How do we look at history? And when I say history, I mean essentially the history of the human race and the origins of civilization. Typically, that's the arena I like to play in, not so much modern history or things beyond what we'd call ancient history. And this is a New Scientist article that was published in 2006, so less than 20 years ago now, not that long ago. Essentially looking at the timeline of human evolution, it begins around 195,000 years ago. And this is when they say that Homo sapiens first appeared on the scene, right? This was the fossil record of human beings as we know it. So roughly 200,000 years old. That was the earliest remains found in Ethiopia. 50,000 years ago, the Great Leap Forward. This was a cultural advance. We kind of associate this with the ritual burying of the dead, domestication of animals, potentially creating clothes from animal hides, developing complex techniques. Those early signs of culture, religion, things like that start to appear. Also coincides with the date of, well, the thought first date of colonization of Australia by modern humans. 12,000 years ago, the Clovis people, this is known as the Clovis State in America. This is when modern people first reached the Americas. 10,000 years ago, agriculture develops. The first signs of villages. Possible domestication of dogs happens around this time. And then 4,000 to 3,500 BC, which is 6,000 to 5,500 years ago, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia developed the world's first civilization, followed by the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Chinese, everybody else, right? So essentially, when you look at it on the big picture, it looks something like this. From Stone Age to the space shuttle in 6,000 years, right? That's just, obviously there's ups and downs in there, but that's the general path. And this is an interesting concept. This is something that we'll return to because I think this concept represents, I like to call it a pillar or a tenet of what it means to be a modern human, right? We're all taught this. We know this in school. Like this is essentially, it's tied up in our identity as humans, who we are, how we're here, what our place is relative to everything else. We know that we were cavemen and now we're civilized, and that as far as we know, civilization as it stands today, that's the only way it's been done. Like there's like almost like a predetermined path. Like this is the way civilization should go. And it's baked into our identity today. Like people know this to a certain or lesser degree, but essentially this is encoded into our identity. And I think as we return to at the end of the presentation, it'd be interesting to see what might happen if we could change some of these ideas. So when we look at the standard model of history, particularly over the last 20 years, it's facing a lot of pressures and pressures to change. And it's the very nature of establishment to resist change, right? So this is where all these battlegrounds are going on. But from everything from new discoveries in archaeology, new discoveries in the human timeline, DNA evidence, our origin stories, the evidence for cataclysm, which is really one of the primary focuses of this conference, to the evidence for ancient technology, which is what we'll focus on today. All of these are vectors for change to the standard model of history that gets essentially resisted, but that's the ongoing fight, right? That's the battleground of this. So briefly covering some of these other topics, starting with new discoveries in archaeology. There's one that's really obvious. A lot of people here, I'm sure, are very familiar with this, which is the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I recently had the chance with the Snake Bros to visit this site for the first time. George also in April this year. It's an amazing site. It is essentially attributed as a hunter-gatherer site today. It's still, you look it up on Wikipedia with being the very definition of the establishment take on a lot of things. It is still attributed as hunter-gatherer, although there's a lot to, I think, out there to challenge this. It's a massive megalithic site. It was first discovered in like the 60s and dismissed as being not very old because the stonework was too good. And it wasn't until the 90s when the German Archaeological Institute started to excavate, and they were like, wow, this is stuff we haven't seen. It doesn't really match other stonework patterns and work that we've seen. And eventually they kept digging. Klaus Schmidt, who sadly passed away, they dug down. And eventually they dated this site. They dug down and they were able to take carbon C14 datings, and it's very firmly dated at around 12,000 years old. It's a huge megalithic site. They've only uncovered maybe 5 or 10% of this site. There's lots of these stone circles. You can see them, an image of it here. They're arranged in geometric patterns. There are all sorts of astronomical alignments. Some of the stone circles, there's been recent studies done to show that they're actually positioned geometrically relative to each other. They form things like equilateral triangles. There's a lot of interesting studies happening here. The stone circles themselves consist of huge T-pillars, some of them 15 plus tons, 18 feet tall. They're quite respectable and massive pieces of stone. It's more than just stone circles as well at this site. There are buildings, there are quarries, there are stone-cut cisterns that exist here. All to me signs of civilization. Like this is not simply just a ceremonial site. But even if it was, in order to do this type of work, I mean, it takes specialization. Like it's not just the case of these hunter-gatherers, you know, picking up a weekend hobby to get away from the wife and the kids, right? So. And it's very interesting, and digging into the details, and I know the Snake Bros are working on an excellent piece of content that gets into this. There are issues with the dating. As you can see from the image here, they get the dates for this site. This 12,000-year-old dates comes from the walls, not the stone pillars. It comes from the walls, these small rubble walls that are built up around these circles. In a lot of cases, they encompass the pillars. In fact, these walls cover up a lot of the features on some of these pillars. And in some of the walls, you even find pieces of broken pillars. So it's like, how long were these pillars and this site here before it was reinforced with these stone walls that they know the site was then deliberately buried around 12,000 years old? So there's lots of questions yet as to the date. It is possible that this is a vastly ancient site. We really don't know. But this is far from the only thing that's been found recently in Turkey. Karahan Tepe, also both these sites located in southeastern Turkey near the modern-day city of Şanlıurfa, also known as Urfa. It's the biblical Edessa. It's a city of prophets. On the Silk Road, it goes back thousands and thousands of years itself. But Karahan Tepe is another site that it's only recently been excavated. The University of Istanbul started work there in 2019. It's older than Göbekli Tepe, at least 500 years older based on the dating. It shows a lot of similar features. It's much larger. It's at least 5 times larger than Göbekli Tepe. They've discovered at least 250 T-pillars on this site, as many as possibly 1,000 on this site. And we've also, when we were visiting the site, there's a T-pillar in a quarry that hadn't fully been cut out from the bedrock. That thing, I mean, it probably weighed 30 tons. It's a big piece of stone. So there's a lot yet to find in this region. And in fact, in the last couple of years, thanks to scanning and much more effort to find these sites, they've actually found between 40 and 80 more sites themselves in this region of Turkey. It's as you know, Luke was talking about all these undiscovered cities and sites in South America and Central America. Same thing in this part of Turkey. It's a whole chapter, I think, of human civilization that we have yet to uncover, that we know nothing about. It's quite remarkable. And again, this is one site that also has dwellings, permanent dwellings. Like, this isn't a hunter-gatherer site. It's a sign of people being in one place, developing what you can only call civilization. So it's a funny story, actually, that when this first came out, if people remember the debate with Graham Hancock and I think Michael Shermer on Joe Rogan Experience, and he was claiming that this is signs of civilization, that at that point after that was when the establishment changed the definition of hunter-gatherer to also include megalithic stonework as a side hobby. So that's what happened. I think it's a sign of civilization. So this is challenging that standard model of 6,000 years old, right? A civilization may well have existed prior to this. And it's worth noting that this was buried during the Younger Dryas. So after the initial impact of the Younger Dryas, during that tumultuous period between the beginning and end of the Younger Dryas. That's when this site, or Göbekli Tepe, was buried. In the Americas, the Clovis Doctrine, the 12,000-year date, has been significantly challenged by a whole number of sites. You can see at least 7 or 8 of them that have been found across the Americas. This is essentially the discovery of human populations in the Americas well before the Clovis date of 12,000 years ago, notably the Bluefish Caves. Although there's a number of different sites here, the Cerruti Mastodon site is one that challenges it severely by like 100,000 years. There's lots of evidence that supports the idea that human beings were in large groups in the Americas before the Clovis date of 12,000 years ago. And this was resisted strongly by the mainstream. In fact, there's been stories written about what happened to the scientist named Jack Cinq-Mars, who discovered Bluefish Caves and presented his research and essentially was ridiculed and laughed out of the room just because it challenged this Clovis date and the Clovis doctrine. And he actually was depressed, and he ended up, he had a lot of problems as a result of this. And this is just the weight of establishment resisting change and resisting new ideas. And he's since been vindicated with the discovery of many more sites that challenge the Clovis doctrine. Also, discoveries in the human timeline. We now know from just fossil records there was a jawbone found in Morocco that extended us from at least 200,000 years old to 300,000 years old. So we gained a third more time just with the discovery now of what is essentially the oldest human fossil that we've found on the planet. This goes further when you look at some of the recent studies into things like teeth morphology. Essentially, this study is fairly recent, 2019, but it states that Neanderthals and humans had a common ancestor that had a different teeth morphology, and based on our dates of the age of the human race, if we were in fact that old, our teeth should have evolved and changed very quickly. But all of the research is showing no, that the rate of evolution and of dental and tooth formation is actually quite slow. So if you go with the rates we determined, it's essentially we're pushing back the dates of humanity to more or less that divergence from a common ancestor happening around 800,000 years ago. So human beings, according to this study, potentially 800,000 years old. This is also backed up by other studies looking specifically into DNA. So as I said, Neanderthals and humans had a common ancestor, and based on the studies into DNA and looking at rates of change and things like that, we may have diverged from that common ancestor as far back as 630 to roughly 800,000 years old. So I like, if you want to put a round number on it, human species, we could be as old as 1 million years, right? Just that's modern, anatomically correct human people, 1 million years old. At least they say 800,000 years old. That's a long time. That takes us back into warm periods. There's lots of room for different cataclysms. I always like to say, if you give human beings, nice weather and enough food to eat, we start solving problems, right? This is how civilization emerges. So there's a whole, we may have a history that goes back much further than the standard model likes to tell us. Of course, there's other interesting aspects of our genetic history that are showing up. This one is a map that shows a genetic affinity that exists between the people of Australasia and the peoples of South America. You can see this by the red dots on the map. Essentially what it's telling you is that the different haplogroups, there's a genetic signal that only exists between the people today that live in Australasia and those that live in South America. And what's challenging about this is when you think about how humans were supposed to have spread out from Africa and how they got into the Americas, which was through the north, through the land bridge that existed between the glaciers. They were supposed to populate the North America first, then into Central and South America. But we don't see these genetic affinities in those groups in Central and North America. So what this is telling us is that there must have been a Pacific migration. There was contact, and a significant contact, between these two groups of people that existed across an ocean. So our pasts are much more complex and interrelated than can be supported by kind of the standard model of how we exist. Of course, another huge just clangor to the story of history, the standard model of history to me, is this concept of cataclysm, right? And we don't need to spend much time talking about the Younger Dryas. You've heard lots about it. You're going to hear lots more about it. But this to me is very significant because it's the key that unlocks all of these possibilities, right? This was theorized about for years and years and years before the first 2007 paper came out. Graham Hancock wrote about it. There's been lots of stories from antiquity that talk about cataclysm, but now we know that around 13,000 years ago, something happened. There was a megafauna extinction. We've got all these impact proxies. Some of the scientists that write the papers, that wrote these papers that are on the screen are going to be talking about it. But this is a very significant key because one thing that, Mark mentioned it, but you can't underestimate the impact this had to the surface of the planet, right? 9% of the biomass on the planet was burning. That's unfathomable destruction. There is just the flooding. If you've ever been with Randall to the channeled scablands or you've watched any content on that, it literally changed the surface of the earth. It was a civilization ender. This would have wiped, and it would wipe us out if it happened today. Our civilization would probably be done. So it does unlock a lot of these possibilities, and to me, it's a huge key to the story of what might be our true history. And then, of course, this does tie in with another topic that has been explored by a lot of people. Randall's one of them. And that is the grains of truth that are encoded in our origin stories. Of course, when the age of reason, the age of enlightenment started, science itself began to evolve. There was a dramatic and targeted swing against the catastrophism that was contained in so many origin tales and religions, right? There was a swing against that. It's very much exemplified in the fields like geology, but it happened across scientific fields as they emerged. There was a definite direction to move away from the catastrophism contained in origin stories, and now we're finding that there might be grains of truth to these origin stories. Even in our own religions of the day, the religions of the book, we talk about massive floods. The vast majority of origin stories from South American tribes, it's flood or fire. George listed off a long list of origin stories this morning that contain these similar myths. The Nordic Eldorado, the Mahabharata. These stories are endless. Almost you can't look at any origin story, religion, modern or ancient, and not find a reference to destruction of the world through flood or through fire. And another concept that's always in these stories, and even in ours, and that is that their ancestors existed before this cataclysm, and in often cases are described as being significantly advanced, magical beings, mystical powers, and they were destroyed, brought low by the wrath of God, or whatever it is, right? Cosmic shooting gallery, maybe. And then forced to rebuild again. Right? There is truth to be found in some of these origin stories. And then, of course, the topic that we're going to dive into a bit more, and we're going, as I said, focus on Egypt today, but a lot of these topics do work equally well for other cultures. And that is the existence of out-of-place artifacts, advanced ancient artifacts that seem to exist from the very earliest parts and portions of time and civilization as we know it. Johanna touched on a number of them. We have massive, huge obelisks. She talked about the Stone of the South, or the Stone of the Pregnant Woman in Baalbek. Another example here is the unfinished obelisk in Aswan. That's actually George in the photo, walking around at the unfinished obelisk. The schist, the statues, the vases, the boxes, the columns. Again, a lot of these artifacts come from the very earliest times of those civilizations. And there's a real contradiction here that we'll get into. But there's whole categories of these artifacts. We also have evidence for remarkable forms of machining. And again, all these objects and these marks you see are made into some of the very hardest stones available. Like, this is not easy material to work. Granite, diorite, basalt. Some of these vases, corundum, some of them are made from primarily corundum, which is a 9 on the Mohs scales. Porphyry, schist, lapis. These are brittle and very difficult stones to work, but we see across those things, as well as slabs and in other areas, evidence for straight saws, circular saws that are just eating through this material, which is determined. You can see this from the striations. The evidence for very advanced tubular drills that do not match the marks that you get from more, Bronze Age grinding techniques that we know existed as well, but these have entirely different tool signatures. We have this bullnose that's on the top left. It's an unfinished edge, and it's just a remarkable tool that seemed to have formed this before it was rounded off and made circular, but this is the result of some tool that machined this edge into this formation just to give it its rough shape. This is not the result of any process of some guy rubbing on it with a rock and sand. Equally as impressive are the compound curve surfaces. You see these blocks up at Giza, the one middle bottom. just these compound curved surfaces that are perfectly flat and smooth with no visible or imperfections that you can feel by touching. This is very complex geometry, and ask any machinist to try and make this in stone, or anybody who's familiar with creating these sort of artifacts or these shapes. It's a difficult process. And of course, what's the standard model explanation for this? Well, they're all made with these sort of tools, right? Because this is what we found. Flint chisels, bronze chisels and adzes. Soft material, doesn't really do much against granite. People have tested this. Dolerite pounders, pounding stones. Very simple, primitive tools, because this is what we found. And essentially the standard model does rely on this fact. Well, we found these artifacts, and these are the tools we found, therefore these artifacts were made with these tools. And I will probably also remind you that Egyptologists are not in general engineers and construction experts, because anybody who's familiar with any of these sort of projects will tell you that a lot of this isn't capable, and it's, for that matter, never been shown that it is possible to make these tools. We've actually done very little testing with some of these tools and models that are explained or used to explain the standard model. No one's ever cut a refrigerator-sized block of granite in half by grinding. I mean, we've sat there for days and we've made cuts about this deep that don't look at all anything like the results we get. This is essentially a lot of unproven assertions trying to tie these sort of tools back to the examples that we saw. That said, we do find artifacts and lots of examples of stuff that does match these tools. We know they use these tools, and I'm confident the dynastic Egyptians and other cultures created artifacts and architecture using these tools, and I'll show you some examples of those. So, before we go there, what I wanted to kind of get through was how we've developed the standard model, particularly as it relates to Egyptology. It comes from the writing. Johanna talked a little bit about this. I like to call it the bedrock of Egyptology. Once the science of Egyptology and deciphering hieroglyphs emerged, that was the primary methodology used to date stuff, right? Once we started, the Rosetta Stone was used, we could start to understand Egyptian hieroglyphs. If a place, an object, a thing has writing on it, and it has a dude's name on it, and from the other writings we've got the timelines and the list of kings, and we know kind of when they lived, then therefore that object, that place, everything about it, made by him, for him, in his time. That's the mainstream story of history. Great place to kind of examine some of the inconsistencies with this approach is what my favorite site in Egypt. If I had to pick one, it'd be this, the Serapeum. A remarkable site, underground labyrinth or giant galleries with these alcoves. It contains 25 of the most amazing single-piece stone, granodiorite, cyanide boxes that you'll ever see. Single piece, right? These aren't bolted together. It's a single piece with a lid cut from the same piece of stone. These weigh up to 100 tons. Some of them potentially a little more. Like the body of the box is like anywhere between 50 to 80 tons. The lids might be up to 30 tons. They've been moved in through an underground series of tunnels and expertly centered and lowered into these alcoves. There are 25 of them. 3 of them have some form of inscriptions. 2 of them have only a tiny little inscription that's been written on them. One box in particular is kind of covered in inscriptions. It's considered the most valuable because of this, and you can actually get down and get close to this box when you see it. And here's an example of the writing that's on this box. I love this photo because if you look at the corner on the right-hand side of the box, you can see the light reflecting off the light at the end of the passage there, off the stone. Like this is not a natural property of granite. Getting your kitchen counter to shine like this takes a lot of work and a lot of polishing with a lot of industrial machines, but they were doing this thousands of years ago. These boxes are geometrically perfect on the inside. Many of them are. They could create straight lines. They're perfect. They would facet the boxes on the outside, and they would go to extreme lengths to remove cracks from the material. So sometimes you look at these boxes, you see these scoop marks. They've scooped material out. What they were doing was emptying cracks. So if there's a crack, they would sort of empty it out, remove the crack. We don't know why. To me, it speaks to the solidity of the boxes. They needed the boxes to withstand vibration or stress or something, because if this box, of course the mainstream explanation is they were sarcophagus or sarcophagi for the Apis bull. Who cares if it's got a crack that you can see, you can barely see in it. You throw in a bull carcass, you shut the lid, you put it away. It doesn't matter. But they went to great lengths to make these boxes solid. And it's a perfection of machining. It's very sophisticated work, yet the writing, it's a different story. It's essentially hieroglyphic graffiti. You can clearly see how a guy has attacked this box with a chisel and a hammer. It couldn't make a straight line in the writing. It's obviously hand work, like it's literally a guy with a hammer and chisel. Matches the technology that we saw in the museums. The flint chisel, even in later periods, Ptolemaic times, they had iron, they had steel, and this is what it kind of looks like when you attack a box with an iron chisel. Another interesting part of this box is that there's an empty Shen ring, a cartouche. So this is the symbol that you typically see a king's name, or it's reserved for royalty. It's an empty Shen ring. Now, if we had found this box with the name Ptolemy in there, or the name of a king, then we would ascribe this box to him, and probably the entire site to him. And you can see that's exactly how it would fit into the standard model of history, but we don't see that. What's probably happening here is the priests who inherited this site, and they inherited these boxes, and inheritance is a really important concept when we look at these artifacts, because I think you'll see that's where a lot of them have come from. They were using the site. They were using it as a sacred site. They were selling access to these boxes. The Serapeum's covered in these alcoves for steles and dedications, and it's like going to you could get your little granite dedication put into the wall of the Serapeum. That's like buying a Kia, but if you want the Rolls Royce, you can buy this thing, right? But that's probably what was going on here. But it's an empty Shen ring, and it could have been attributed to anyone, and that's how it would have been put into the story of history. And we see this all over the place. So some other examples of remarkable artifacts, remarkable machining in very hard stone. This is something called a Hyksos Sphinx. Note the design of the ribs on the side of this thing using light. Like the reflection of light is showing you the sophistication of manufacturing that's gone into the statue, yet look at the carving. I mean, it's crudely hacked into the side of this just incredibly polished and finished artifact. The glyphs are, again, the result of handmade work. It's a different technology. Johanna mentioned this, but in the example, they say, well, it was different people. Different guys would do the writing. That's not how stonemasonry works. I mean, it doesn't matter how good an artist you are on paper. Try hammering that out of stone. It's a different skill. The way the writing, if you were making the writing with the statue, you would have the guy draw the writing on it, and then you would have a stonemason come in who knows how to carve stone to carve the writing, and he's going to have access to the same tools, it's the same set of skills, it's the same everything that's used to create the artifact itself. So yeah, it's not, you don't have a scribe do writing in stone, they write it on paper. You have stonemasons work on stone, whether it's carving a statue or it's carving writing, but clearly two different types of technology going on here. Some more examples. Find details of an old kingdom. Again, these come from the very earliest parts of time, granodiorite statue. Look at the clavicle, the top of the chest. Again, these very fine, beautiful details that are reflected almost with light. I mean, the perfection of machining and polishing is astonishing. Similar, when we talk about polishing, they were able to polish non-flat surfaces like the fingernails, the insides of the fingers, the joints. It's covered in dust, but that is all polished. The standard model explanation for how stone was polished, well, you know, what they did was they got sand and water and rocks and they rubbed it. They just rubbed away. And that might work for a flat surface. You might eventually get some polish there, but that is never going to work for these contoured and uneven surfaces. Yet they were absolutely able to polish these sort of parts of statues. No problem. Another example, probably the best knee on display in the Cairo Museum. Just incredible detail in the musculature, the bone structure, just remarkable. Yet when we look at the glyphs, even on their best statues, it's clearly handmade. You can see the interior of the bird glyph. It's not polished. You can see chisel marks. It's a handmade chisel. They don't polish. There's no glyphs that you'll find that are polished like the statues. Yet we know they were able to polish complex surfaces like the insides of glyphs. And even with the cartouche that's on the side of this, the lines of it aren't straight. They were quite able to make straight lines everywhere else. So, is it possible the writing was added later? Was the writing a result of a completely different technology? A primitive technology? The writing's the way we date and relate all of these statues, objects, sites into the story of history. There's another explanation for this, and that's the concept of longer timelines and inheritance. One more example, and this is basically the same thing. Remarkable Old Kingdom granodiorite statue, very crudely carved glyphs. I think it's possible we're looking at two separate timelines, certainly two separate technologies. So statues also display some very significantly advanced technologies. There's overcuts. If you look closely at these statues, we see overcuts on the seat between the arms. It's, we've done some tests how long it takes to grind away and use those Bronze Age techniques to grind away at the stone. And I can tell you these overcuts would have taken hours and hours to achieve. That's a long time to be consistently making a mistake. This is the result of some powerful tool that was able to remove this material. More overcuts. More overcuts. You see them beneath the arms, between the legs, the evidence for tubular drills between the feet. These aren't the only places we see overcuts. We see them on obelisks, some other pieces of stonework. These are overcuts that are made by a very fine blade, probably a circular saw, because they start and end and then the depth changes. I've actually tested the depths on some of these. Made into granite on obelisks that are at places like Karnak. And again, the writing that's on these obelisks doesn't match the technology that's been used to carve the object itself. This is one of my favorite examples of inheritance and reuse. You're looking at here is a section of an obelisk. It's been repurposed at least a couple of times. It's now laid horizontally. Normally obelisks, you'll see the writing's kind of vertical, but it's been reused as a block in a wall, and then it's been carved with a name. And if you're spending time in Egypt, you'll recognize this cartouche. It's the cartouche of Ramses II, Ramses the Great, the greatest pharaoh of all time. Flinders Petrie called him the great usurper, because if you look closely at this writing, you'll see that he was actually writing his name over some pre-existing carvings that were made here. This is a closer look at the end of this obelisk. You can see how they were blending that new line of glyphs in over the top of pre-existing glyphs. So what was written on this before this? Before Ramses of the 19th dynasty decided to put his name on it. I mean, the obelisk, it was originally an obelisk. It was repurposed at some point as a block in a wall and quarried. Somebody else wrote on it, and then Ramses got his hands on it and told his guys, go write my name on this and blend out this other stuff. And this happened over and over again on lots and lots of artifacts. And this is actually acknowledged by standard Egyptology. We see lots of examples for this. Stuff was reused. You find artifacts with 3, 4, 5 different names of pharaohs on them. It's difficult to attribute who did what, but it was common practice for these guys to claim stuff, put their name on it, and we typically use their name to date and relate it into the story of history. Luxor Temple, Temple of Man, fantastic temple, beautiful. These huge granite statues are surrounded by stacked rounds of sandstone and sandstone infrastructure. The columns and pylons are all sandstone, the statues are granite. This might be a little tough to see, but this is a name, a cartouche, I think it might be Merenptah, written over the top of pre-existing features. If you look closely at his belt line, you'll see there's a dagger there, and there's pleating on the skirt. You can actually see the lines from the dagger inside the cartouche. That was already there before somebody decided to hammer this thing on there. If you were going to make this statue in the first place and design it with that cartouche, you wouldn't go to the effort of carving these features into granite only to have them overwritten. These are just overwritten features. Here's another example of a cartouche and name that is obviously overriding the original features of this statue. This is the neck dress, you see the shoulder, the cartouche has kind of been stamped on over the top of these features. When we look at the statues themselves, there's two different categories of artifacts. These are all Old Kingdom statues, remarkable examples. We looked at them in detail a little before, but there's another category of statues as well, less talked about. But these definitely match a more primitive Bronze Age technology. These are handmade statues, and it's obvious. They don't show the same precision, they don't show the same polish. Even this beautiful statue that's on the left, which is of a young Ramses II, being protected by the god Horun. Remarkable statues made from basalt, handmade. And you know what? The statue's features and the stonework matches the glyphs that are on it. It was made, the glyphs were made, it's probably been made by his team. Lots of other examples, obviously handmade, hammered, chiseled. Still remarkable work. Like, I don't want to underestimate the dynastic Egyptians. They were a huge, mighty civilization that existed for thousands of years, capable of astonishing work. And we have examples of that work that matches the tools in the archaeological record. These other statues, however, don't, and there's been some studies that have gone into them. This is one of my favorite pictures from a very good friend of mine, Somebody I admire greatly is Christopher Dunn. This is an image from his book looking at a massive head of Ramses. It used to be right on the ground out the front at Luxor Temple. Now they've reconstructed the statue and put it up 30 feet in the air where no one can get a good look at it. And what he did, if you look closely at the image on the left, this is a reverse transparency overlay. You can see Chris is on both sides of the photo putting his hand on the beard. And what he was doing here was you take a picture that's directly aligned on its center line, you make it 50% transparent, you make a copy of that picture, you flip it on that horizontal or vertical axis, and then you overlay the two. And what it's showing you is the perfect symmetry that exists in this artifact between the left and the right features. If it wasn't perfectly symmetrical, the jawline, the nose, the eyes, you would see that with this overlay. And this type of symmetry doesn't exist in the human face, doesn't exist in, as beautiful as it is, the statue of David by Michelangelo, which I've seen. It's remarkable. It's the result of precision. It's not something that's easily achievable. In fact, it speaks to the design process that might have been used to create this. The most efficient way might be to design half the face and then just mirror image it and press go on whatever system's going to make this thing. And we see this sort of symmetry in these statues. We also see other features like consistent eye lines and lip lines across multiple statues of Ramses. It's quite funny in that the face of Ramses is on a lot of statues it's the same, and on other statues he looks like something completely different, but because he's got his name on it, they're all Ramses. So. Similarly, we see other features, the repeated use of the same diameter circles in the construction of this statue. We also have a reverse transparency overlay, same thing, that's been applied to what you would call the head jet, the crown that sits on top of these Egyptian heads. There's another form called a pashent. It might look simple, but these shapes are absolutely remarkable. They're completely challenging from a manufacturing perspective. They have compound curved surfaces, and what I mean by that is there's the curvature of those objects changes over time, and then in some cases reverses for this, bowling pin style hat, and they're just perfectly smooth, and there's no variance to it. This is a really complex manufacturing process, and Chris Dunn, who is a manufacturing expert, been making parts for the aerospace industry for 50 years, wrote about this in his book, and this was one thing that he said, and just quoting from Chris, quote, "The design and precise geometry that was crafted in a Ramses crown is a symbol of a society that was disciplined in precision, engineering, and craft. The pieces could not have been created without the aid of some kind of mechanical device that guided the tool along a prescribed contour. Neither was this mechanical device a simple machine. Applying the tools of 50 years ago to the Ramses challenge would severely tax craftsmen skilled in manufacturing, and the tools and instruments necessary to ensure such precise geometry would not even be in a sculptor's toolbox." End quote. This is remarkable evidence for some pretty sophisticated manufacturing. So we have a tale of two industries on the statues. We see a similar thing with pyramids as well. There's two types of pyramids that we typically see. We see giant stone triangles that are made up of amazing blocks, and they've been studied to death, and they show all sorts of precision. We could spend 2 hours just talking about the features of the Great Pyramid that show the incredible amount of engineering and precision that went into its manufacture. And then we have another style of pyramids that are made from mud bricks and that are mostly falling apart and eroding slowly in the Egyptian desert. And I like to call it a contradiction to the technological timeline. You might think, well, did they start with these small pyramids, these mud brick pyramids, and then they evolved over time to create, massive stone pyramids made of giant stone blocks? No, it seems to be the other way around. The very first pyramids ever made, Step Pyramid, Maidoom Pyramid, Maidoom, Bent Pyramid, Red Pyramid, Great Pyramid, Middle Pyramid, Third Pyramid at Giza. These are all massively megalithic stone pyramids. They're made up of huge blocks. They're amazingly precise. Some of them are cased in granite. And after that, we've got mud brick pyramids. I mean, this is a picture from Giza Plateau. We're standing next to the middle pyramid. You see the Great Pyramid on the right. This pyramid has huge blocks of limestone, much bigger blocks than are used in the Great Pyramid. Some of them weigh 30 tons, 40 tons, and it was cased in granite. The bottom two courses were cased in granite. The rest of it was this hard Tura limestone. It's a remarkable bit of engineering, and of course the Great Pyramid. But after that, we get this. So for some reason, they just stopped building stone pyramids, switched over to mud brick, in all of the later periods. And we have a depiction of pyramid building. There's one found in the Tomb of the Nobles. They show us how they built pyramids. That shows us how they built these pyramids. Shows us how they made mud bricks and stacked them up, and they were doing this. And I think this might be an example of another thing that we see along with inheritance, which is imitation and replication, right? So if you were a culture that somehow inherited some remarkable artifacts, things that you knew were advanced, you couldn't replicate them, you might try to imitate them. You might try to capture some of that significance through ceremony and tradition and religion and base your culture around it. I think there's some of that going on when we look at the dynastic Egyptian civilization. Okay, vases. Another category of artifacts. There exists a remarkable set of vases. Johanna kind of talked about it briefly. The schist disc is shown here. Hard stone vases, made from some of the hardest stones found on the planet. The bottom right one here is primarily corundum. It's a 9 on the Mohs scale. Diamonds are 10. Granites, like a 6.5. Basalt, granodiorite can be a 7. Flints, like 7.5. Steels, 6.5. Irons, a 5. Coppers, a 3. So these are all much harder than a lot of metals that we use for tools today. Typically, this material's only worked with silica carbide, diamond dust, diamond bit drills. Like that's how we work in this material today. Yet there exist thousands of these vases that show precision aspects and are made from some of the hardest types of stone out there. Some of them show just perfect balance and symmetry. It's one of my favorite examples in the museum. There's a tiny, it's like this thing's balanced so well, it's almost like an egg standing on its end. Remarkable piece of machining and manufacturing from a very hard stone. Some of these were very thin. Just incredible manufacturing and machining in hard stone. This is a vase, I think it might be porphyry. But you can see the large crystal inclusions, right? This is these white marks that are all through this. This is one of the tricks and the problems with working in this type of material is a lot of these stones are conglomerates. They're made up of different types of materials, which means that as you're carving it or rubbing on it or however you're making it, you're going from soft to hard to soft in the material itself, and it can be brittle when it gets thin. Sometimes you might rip a whole chunk of quartz out of one of these vases, but that's not what we see. And in this case, you can see a damaged vase here, and the image on the right gives you an idea of just how thin that material was when they machined it. It's remarkable. Flinders Petrie found one that probably takes the cake, and he wrote about it in 1883. So something he said, this Petrie's one of my favorite characters from history, and he said that, quote, "The greatest triumph is a bowl of diorite, translucent and full of minute flaws, which must render it very brittle. Yet this bowl, 6 inches diameter, is only 1/40th of an inch thick over its greatest part. Just around the edge it is thicker in order to strengthen it, but a small chip broken out of the body of it shows its extraordinary thinness, no stouter than thin card." This is a true challenge to make this out of a stone like diorite. Petrie also found evidence for the machining process of these vases. And remember, a lot of these things come from the Old Kingdom, the early times. There was, according to the standard model, no wheel, no rotating tools, no access to things like lathes, yet there is tremendous evidence that these objects were turned. In fact, you can see here images from Chris Dunn's book where he found and he's examining the exact same fragments that Petrie was writing about in the late 1800s. These are available if you want to go to the Petrie Museum and look at them. Chris Dunn analysed them. This is what Petrie said about this. The principle of rotating the tool was, for smaller objects, abandoned in favour of rotating the work. And the lathe appears to have been as familiar an instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in modern workshops. The diorite bowls and vases of the Old Kingdom are frequently met with and show great technical skill. So we're already in realms of technology that are well beyond what we think the dynastic Egyptians were capable of. And this is backed up by some other interesting observations you can make when you go to these museums. These vases, these hard stone vases, and Johanna was very right when she said these aren't pottery. People call them pottery. These are carved stone vases, yet they're displayed next to simple pottery. You see this all over the place. This is a hard stone vase on the right displayed next to a handmade, not spun, clay pottery vase. And you'll notice that the clay pottery vase has even been painted to look like granite. Right? It's imitation. And this wasn't spun on a wheel, this was handmade, but because they were found in the same burial, they're attributed to the same people. It's just the same technology, apparently. These are worlds apart, but they're displayed next to each other. They go back far into time, far beyond the start of the dynastic Egyptian civilization. One of my other favorite pieces, a thin tube of lapis lazuli with a gold sheath. This is a hollow tube of lapis. There is no source for lapis in Egypt. The nearest quarry for it's probably Afghanistan. Yet it's displayed in a cabinet that is pre-dynastic, as it says on the label, right next to, bone and beads, very primitive artifacts. But it's an out-of-place object that requires significant technological skill to make. We have gourds made from obsidian or rock crystal. These are all pre-dynastic. They've even been found in sites as far back as Toshka, which is 14,500 years old, that's been carbon dated. This site's now underwater thanks to the building of the Aswan Dam. Very primitive burial. You can see the guy's in like a fetal position, but he was found in a burial with primitive pottery and precision-made stone vases. So this is well and truly back before the dynastic civilization ever started. The vast majority of these were discovered beneath the Step Pyramid of Djoser, a third dynasty structure located at Saqqara. There were 40,000 plus of them found. This is an image here from Jean-Philippe Loyer's excavation of the Step Pyramid, a picture of one of the pieces that I found when we were down there exploring. Most of them were found beneath the Step Pyramid, and some of them were inscribed, and there's a standard model explanation for this that's quite interesting. As I said, some were inscribed, and as Johanna pointed out, not very well, but this is how we attribute them into the story of history. And what the standard model says about this is that the production of stone vessels before Imhotep, now if you don't know who Imhotep is, he's not the villain in the mummy movies, he was actually a polymath and a genius that is supposedly responsible for building the Step Pyramid. He worked for the pharaoh Djoser. He was a very interesting figure in history. But this is what they say, that the art of carving stone vessels, which were luxury items intended to hold mainly cosmetic materials and ointments, reached its peak during the first two dynasties. All of the types of stone found in Egypt were used, and apparently some of the types of stone that weren't found in Egypt. I'll also add that there is no evidence in the architecture or other stonework of the first couple of dynasties that they were seemingly capable of doing this type of work with these types of stones, but that's how they attribute them. And then from after that period, it's just a little more detail about it, more than 40,000 vases carved from hard stone were discovered in the galleries beneath the Step Pyramid. Many of these were heirlooms dating from dynasties 1 and 2, and it is thought that Djoser had them buried under his pyramid after they were recovered from earlier tombs. So we're acknowledging, this is in the museum at Saqqara, we're acknowledging that inheritance was taking place, right? I just think they're not going back quite far enough as in the source for this inheritance. Johanna mentioned this. Are they canopic jars? These are the stone lids for a lot of these jars that they found. Very rough mud lids that are now hard and proudly displayed in the museum next to the jars. I will note that the later jars in Egypt, the alabaster vases, which we'll talk about in a minute, did have lids formed. They had beautiful lids made from alabaster, much softer stone. The mainstream explanation for the vases is also shown at Saqqara, and it's depicted as a scene on the wall here. You'll notice no lathes, but essentially a series of primitive techniques where you have a stick that's bent, you have some stones attached to it, maybe a flint tip on it, it's rotated, you're rubbing on some of these vases with rocks and polishing them that way. I suspect this is probably the method that Imhotep came up with in the Third Dynasty, because after this period, this is what you get in Egypt. You get primitive, not primitive, but they're beautiful, but alabaster vases. From the Old Kingdom onwards, these are the forms that Egyptian vases take. They're beautiful, they're made from alabaster, it's like a 3 on the Mohs scale, it's a much softer stone, white calcite's another term for it. And you can clearly see from these images they don't show the same properties as the hard stone vases. They're not symmetrical, they're not perfectly balanced, they're not thin. Some of them are quite obviously handmade and imperfect, and some of them have lids. And of course the hard stone vases from that point on, they disappear. They're out of the record. There are a few exceptions. You know why they're exceptions? Because they have writing on them. They have primitive scratching that's on them that they go, oh, this is from a Middle Kingdom pharaoh, therefore he must have had this vase made. It's just this scratched writing. This guy found one of these things and wrote his name on it. So there are a few exceptions, but generally these just disappear after the earliest times. Okay. Man, I'm behind on time, but we'll go a little bit longer. I think George gave me some permission. So some modern analysis, and I do want to share some of this work that's been going on and give you guys an update as to what we've done with these vases now, because it's been a fascinating topic, but we haven't been able to get into the details and really do some analysis on these vases until now. In fact, in this year, we've finally been able to take one of these vases. You can see it here. It's a pre-dynastic rose granite vase. This is its actual size, so decidedly petite. Right? A lot of people think it's a bigger object. This is its physical size, 6 inches or so tall. And we were able to scan it using a process called structured light scanning, which scans it down to like a thousandth of an inch accuracy, and we're able to create a model of the vase, which then we can subject to analysis. And that model was analyzed in coordinate measurement systems by a couple of engineers and professional metrologists, which is the science of measurement, guys that make aerospace parts for like, rocket engines and jet engines. This is their business. They machine them, they make them, they study them, they measure them. Alex Dunn, who is Chris Dunn's son, as well as Nick Sierra. And the results that we found from this process were quite astonishing. And we're going to get into a few of these details, and I'll try to cover this relatively quickly. But so what happened was the vase, it's essentially an ellipsoid, right? You can't measure this. There's no geometric shape you can just match to this vase. It's an ellipsoid. So what you do is you go and you match regular geometric forms to different areas of the vase, flat planes, spheres, cones, cylinders. You match that to parts of the vase, and that allows you to compare different parts of the vase to each other, and also the perfection of form of that particular part. It also enabled us to establish essentially a reference plane that gives us the axes of the vase, the center line, things like that, and from there we can compare kind of the geometric accuracy of different parts of the vase. So we start with the vase top. And essentially what we did here was we looked at the vase top, used nearly 4,000 points of reference to match a flat plane to it, and that gives us basically think of it like the x-axis, the flat plane of the vase, the top. And you can see here, it's perfectly flat to within 0.03 of an inch. Pretty remarkable. That's kind of just a starting point. From there on, we can actually use the mouth of the vase to determine the center line, right? So think if that's the x-plane, then this is the y plane when we match a cylinder to that mouth of the vase. And using 10,500 points, we can measure its cylindricity on the bottom here. You can see how perfectly that matches a perfect cylinder. It's within 13,000ths of an inch. But interestingly, the parallelism, we can now relate that cylinder. So how perpendicular is this cylinder to the top of the vase? It's within 1,000th of an inch. So it's basically perfectly perpendicular. And this is where the relative, the precision that shows with the study of the relative features to each other. And it's an important concept to remember when you're talking about a single piece that's carved from stone. The precision of form is quite remarkable. We matched a sphere in the blue section to the bottom part of the vase. And this actually is remarkable. This was the largest number that we got in this. It's accurate to the center line of B, so the center point of the sphere is within 17,000ths of an inch of the center line of the vase, using nearly 80,000 points of reference. And what's interesting about this is it also reflects on the perfectness of the spherical part, so how regular that has been shaped, or that part of it has been shaped. Because you can create a sphere and measure it with like 5 points on the top, or you can use 80,000 points to measure it. But if you deform that sphere at all, it shifts that center point. So this is actually a remarkable achievement in how regular this thing has been created to keep that center point of that sphere so close to the center line of the vase. And we're far beyond hand tools when we talk about this, because the bottom of the vase, which is, you're measuring the top and the center line from up here, and the bottom of the vase we're measuring down here. We match a cone to this section of the vase with nearly 60,000 points of reference. And we're perpendicular with B. So the center line of the cone is parallel with the center line of the vase within 9,000ths of an inch, and it's perpendicular with the top of the vase to within 5,000ths of an inch. And these are not levels of tolerance that you can really feel or see with the naked eye, but it's actually just remarkable precision of its geometry. And it's not really achievable by hand. Like we're already in realms where, you might get these results if you use some of our best modern tools, like automated mills and lathes and things like that. The lug handles are entirely a mystery, because if you consider the manufacturing process of this vase, even if we assume that there was a lathe involved, you might think that, well, you can cut it this way, right? You would lathe this whole vase, but you can't lathe the lug handles, right? The vase is spinning this way. All you could do is to leave like a bullnose around the vase, and then come back with a different tool and carve away the area of the vase body in between the lug handles. So that the lug handles were a specific area of interest. First of all, we matched cylinders to the lug handles. You can see they're within 1/1000th of an inch. There's of being parallel with the top of the vase. They're within a couple thousandths of being perpendicular with the center line of the vase. And then you can compare them to each other, which by defining this surface F that you see here. So the lug handles are basically parallel to each other within 7/1000th of an inch, which is also remarkable. But we might be able to learn a little bit more from this vase by analysing the area of the body in between the vase handles, right? Because if you lathe this and you come back with a different tool and you've got to carve this away, it's going to introduce some errors. It's a different tool, it's a different process. But we see no lack of precision, no perceivable lack of precision. The area between the vase handles, when you map a cone to it using 20,000 points, is within 5/1000ths of an inch of being perpendicular, and it's centerline aligning with the centerline of the vase itself. So it's absolutely remarkable. And this is just the geometric analysis of the vase, because the rabbit hole goes much deeper. And we'll get to some of the new information here at the end. So one thing I was really keen on is and so were the guys in the project, but we don't own the vase. It was owned by a private collector. It is pre-dynastic. We wanted to open source the model. We wanted to put it out there, let anybody analyze it, anybody look at it, and eventually we were able to do that. And you can go to my website and download this model if you want to play with it in Blender or whatever. That's how these vases, if you see them run around the conference, they're all printed from that model. But there was a Danish cryptographer by the name of Mark Kvist, who runs a website called Unsigned.io, and he took a deep look at this vase from a mathematical and a geometric analysis. He's a cryptographer. Very unique set of skills when it comes to an artifact like this, and I'm very grateful that he was interested, because his findings are really nothing short of revolutionary for this. He found, essentially where he started was he started to look at the geometric features of the vase, and he found, to start with, that there were interlocking circle of life patterns, right? This is an aspect of sacred geometry. The circle of life appears in the Osirion all over the place. He found that those things showed up in the geometry of the vase. It looks a little complex, but you can follow me through this. The blue grid of circles, represented by the points D here, also the top of the vase at A, it is based on the maximum internal diameter of the vase, right? So he took the geometry of the vase and said, let's overlap the maximum internal diameter with that and make a circle of life pattern, and we see that it correlates with the top of the vase. And then we have another grid of these red circles that is based on a circle that matches the maximum external diameter of the grid, right, with point C. And these things are overlapping. This is kind of his starting point, to start to see that there's a complex series of interrelations between the different geometric parts of the vase. And in fact, he found that there was actually mathematical interrelation between between these elements as well. And the key thing that we take out of this is the realization that this object was designed. It wasn't just made. It wasn't just like an artisan hammering away at this thing or trying to turn it on a lathe. This was designed. And then that design was executed in a manufacturing system with just astonishing precision, which we've just seen. So one of the elements of this mathematical system that he discovered was behind this vase was that it was based on radians. A fundamental design principle is the radian. And if you don't know what a radian is, it's no problem. It's actually just a way of measuring angles. It's a much more elegant, simplified way of measuring angles than our system of 360 degrees. You take the radius of a circle, that length, you apply it to the circumference of a circle, the angle it makes is 1 radian. Then you can go to 2 radians. Half a circle is pi radians, and there are 2 pi radians in a full circle, right? So this is it's a concept of just geometry. It's a way to measure angles that makes actually a fair bit more sense than our somewhat arbitrary 360-degree slicing of the pi. Turns out that several aspects of the vase's geometry are derived by the use of a 1 radian angle. So you can see here that same circle that's used in the circle of life pattern. The top of the vase, the angle of where that circle intersects with the angle of the top of the vase, that if you extend those lines, that's a 1 radian angle at the top. The handles seem to have been positioned by the use of a 1 radian angle from the center circle of this. So they're demonstrating their understanding of this pretty complex mathematical and geometric principle by the geometry of the vase itself. What's even more than that is that Mark found there was a repeating mathematical equation behind the actual curvatures used in all the other aspects of the vase, something called the radial traversal pattern. And it's an algorithm that he found interrelates all of these different circles used to design the vase. You don't have to understand the math in this to understand the significance of what he found. Because as it says here, the most widely used primitive in the vase is the circle, and essentially all of the curvature in the vases are defined by parts of circles or arcs of circles. And the radii of all of these circles that are used to design everything you see here on this vase are all tightly interrelated, and they match this one equation. You can describe this vase by a mathematical equation. In fact, and that's exactly what Mark did. He created a CAD model based purely on the mathematics that he discovered were behind this vase. So no design, no circles. He used this math model to create a model of the vase. And because remember, this is a small object, right? Some of the radii of those circles are as small as 1.1 millimeter. You try and draw a circle with a radius of 1.1 millimeter. I mean, that's like a 25th of an inch. It's going to be difficult to do, but that's how small some of these curves are. There are 12 different circles used in this. They all fit this radial traversal pattern. They can all be described by this one equation. And he then compared that mathematical model of the vase, the model that he did in CAD, to the actual vase, and he found that the median deviation from the CAD model was 9 micrometers, which is less than a thousandth of an inch. Like, this thing's basically perfect relative to the mathematical model for the vase itself. So what's happening here is that there is just this microscopic levels of precision going on that's based on a mathematical formula that's been implemented across 12 different radii of circles, and then this has been executed in granite with just astonishing precision, and it's at least 5,000 years old. Like, it's mind-blowing what we're finding from this vase. Some of the other aspects of the vase that aren't covered by that radial traversal pattern, sacred geometry, pi, phi, the golden ratio, the golden number, these are also represented in this vase. So we see pi can be calculated by the left-hand picture of the radius of the inside circle of the lip to the outside, or the neck of the vase to the lip of the vase. We get pi within 0.1%. And if we compare the radii of the internal diameter to the external diameter on the outside of the vase here, we get the golden ratio squared to within an accuracy of less than 0.1%. So, these are features. It's not just sacred geometry, and these terms aren't just like meaningless woo terms. I mean, these are tightly coupled with the nature of our universe. So what we can see here is that the precision, the complexity, the depth of interrelation of these mathematical features really rules out random chance, right? This artifact was designed. As Mark himself said in his article, it'd be much more likely that you would wake up one morning with a whole new quantum universe sprouting out of your left nostril than it is for this thing to be purely an accident of just handmade design, right? This vase was designed. How can you design it? Remember the size of the vase, it's tiny. Could you design it on paper? Maybe. If your paper was as big as like 4 or 5 of these tables drawn together, you can scale it up, but then how do you scale it back down? You still have to get this thing down to a size that's going to reflect, circles with a diameter of a millimeter, and even with our best drafting tools and sharpest pencils, you're going to make mistakes that are equivalent to the full radius of some of these features. It can't be done. The reality is that this artifact is best represented mathematically. Then somehow this mathematical design or this geometric design was transferred to a manufacturing system, and we know, because we've looked at the details, it was executed in rose granite, a very difficult medium that again it's a conglomerate, goes from hard to soft with just astonishing precision. What's more is that there was no loss of what I would call positional calibration. This comes back to the discussion about the vase handles, right? So either, you're left with a conclusion, either this thing was made in a single pass, right, with one tool. That means you had to have 5 axes of freedom to shape it. That's a 5-axis mill. That's our best technology today with CNC machines. Or whoever made this, if they did do a tool change and a process change to carve these handles, they were better at dealing with positional calibration than we are. Even in our best machines, when you change a tool, you change a process, it introduces errors into the object. It's something that they cater for in the design of like aerospace parts, and we just don't see that on this vase. So you're left in a really awkward position of what does this actually mean? How is this thing made? So if we follow this concept from where math, a design to real-world output actually leads, where this evidence and logic goes, I want to quote Mark himself from the article that he wrote. As far as we know, no human beings, trained animals, or naturally occurring phenomena, modern or ancient, take mathematical formulae and equations as input and produce lathe operating motions as output. For all the knowledge and insights we've accumulated over the ages, we know of exactly one and only one category of things capable of such behavior. The kind of thing that we refer to as a Turing machine. A device capable of taking input, holding state, performing operations on held states according to predetermined principles and producing output. These things Turing machines come in all sorts of sizes. You can make them pneumatically, hydraulically, mechanically, or electronically, and we've all probably got one in our pockets without having access to one such. This thing had to have been designed on a computer. It's the only way to get that design to output, to what we see. And it also speaks volumes to the sophistication of the manufacturing system that produced it. You can't make this by hand, you can't even get close. There was a very sophisticated manufacturing system that took that output and then created this thing that matches the design so closely and is just so precise. So, this artifact is much more than a simple vase. It's not just a vase. Within it is encoded the principles of sacred geometry, which really do relate back to the very fabric of our universe, right? It's not just some woo term. It's this from the structure of molecules, DNA itself with its double helix spiral that reflects the golden ratio. You cut that molecule in half, you see the golden ratio in there as well. It's reflected in nature from the ratio between the upper and lower arm of humans to the construction of shells in marine life, to the movement of tornadoes and cyclones, to the movement of galaxies and the structure of galaxies. Like these are features of our universe, and some people have even theorized that space-time itself might reflect things like the golden ratio. That's encoded into the data that's on this thing. This vase is telling us a story of its creator's capability, their elegance, their knowledge, their sophistication, even their mathematical system, which might well have been a mathematical system. I like to think it's a base radian system. We use a base 10 system today. It's our decimal system. They may well have done all of this math in a system that was like base radian. It's a more sophisticated model, I guess, of mathematics that might well be related to essentially principles of the universe. They're telling us a story about their capabilities. And this was interesting because I told you about Nick Sierra and Alex Dunn earlier. Very, very smart dudes. And Nick, double degrees, and just, he works in this high-pressure, high-end job, super intelligent. Once he read this analysis and the work that was done by by Mark Kvist, he called me up. He's like, I have to talk to you. He was like, this is waking me up at night. Like he'd really absorbed what Mark was saying and what he'd found with this analysis of the vase. He's like, it's keeping me up at night. And his whole worldview had been shaken, right? He'd finally, even though he'd seen the precision of the vase, he'd finally gone, man, there was really something else going on back here. This took sophisticated capability and technology. And what he said to me was pretty profound. And I like to relate the story because, because what he said, it's kind of like the records that are on the Voyager probes. Right? Voyager probes, there's 2 of them, launched in the 70s, now well out beyond the solar system in interstellar space. They also have these golden records. They're encoding information about our species in a number of different, geometric techniques and tools and math, and there's even, radioactive elements on those records to sort of give it a launch clock. But it's essentially giving them information about our capabilities, even our location, our species, and it's been sent out through space. To some extent, this vase represents the same thing. If we had the eyes to see it and to decode it, but instead of being sent through space, it's something that's been sent through time. And we're only now just starting to uncover its messages. So, future work. What else is happening with this? I think it's really unlikely that we hit a unicorn on the first try. This was the first vase that we've ever subjected to this degree of analysis, and we need to expand our data set. On its own, it's a remarkable result. People criticize its provenance. They can push back on things like that. I think we address that in some of the content we produced around this. However, we are expanding our data set. And I got to say, like, just crowdsourcing and open sourcing this has been a really remarkable project, because right now we've probably got at least 6 or 7 more vases that we're analyzing. We're scanning them. We've put this vase through a CT machine, an MRI, which gives a much better resolution. We're down to the micrometer now in resolution. It gives us full visibility of the interior of the vase, which was not really captured during the structured light scan. You can see this is actually the model for that vase that came out of the MRI. And we're looking at other vases. Mark's doing analysis on these vases. We've got there's people around the world that have been buying these vases. It's kind of like increased the price and reduced the inventory on the antiquities market somewhat. And some of these vases are absolutely remarkable. You can see them here. Like the one in the top right is actually translucent. It's that thin. It's granite, but if you shine a light into it, the light comes through the stone. And I can tell you that we are finding similar things, in fact, even more interesting things on these vases, not only in their geometric precision, but in the mathematical interrelation of different features. We're learning more about these things. So that's the future of this project. So yeah, I'm very encouraged for where this thing is going. So I think, and that's probably going to do it for my time up here today. I hope you guys enjoyed that look into the vases. Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.